Hello, everyone, and welcome. My name is Karen Ware-Jackson, and I'm the webinar coordinator for PRC, Practical Resources for Churches. We're a nonprofit ecumenical resource center offering consultants, workshops, webinars, and resources to congregations and individuals. We're able to offer these webinars for free thanks to the generous support of a number of grants and also to our subscribers. You can see on our screen that our subscribing judicatories or our member judicatories. These are regional governing bodies that subscribe to our services for the congregations that they represent. If you're a member of one of these groups, please make sure to thank your judicatory staff for their support of PRC and make sure you're utilizing our services. You can also join and be a member of PRC both as an individual and as a ministry, so a congregation or a community ministry. And when you join as a member of PRC, you have access not only to our fantastic free webinars and our free online resource center, but you also have resources to our consultants. At PRC, we say everyone has a calling and ours is helping you. That means if you have a question from QuickBooks to curriculum to copyrights, you can send us an email, give us a call, and we're going to help you out. We also have some fantastic new cohorts that we're launching that are for members only. And we'd love to tell you a lot more about those. So there's a lot of great ways that we are resourcing, especially churches, congregation, clergy, and church professionals. So we'd love for you to take advantage of that. If you're interested in learning more, I went ahead and put some information in the chat. Many of you are really aware of our webinars. Here you are in one right now. So I want to make sure you're aware about some we have coming up that may interest you. On Tuesday, August 23rd, we have a webinar on parenting for a better world. This is a new book with authors Susanna Snyder and Ellen Ott Marshall, and they'll be with us to offer that webinar. It's a free webinar. There's a link to register for that in the chat in just a minute. And we also have another one coming up on September 13th with Ann Cansfield, who's the author of Be the Brave One, and that's a fantastic memoir on their experiences as a pastor and a chaplain for the New York Fire Department. So if you're interested in any of those webinars, there's some links in the chat. But I know you are here to learn about developmental concerns regarding children, youth, and COVID. And we are so grateful to have Dr. Elizabeth Geiling here with us today. She received her PhD in mental health counseling from Pace University in New York and a master's degree and professional diploma in counseling from Fordham University. Betty has worked as a school psychologist and school counselor and has expertise in school-related problems and children with special needs. Currently, she is the director of counseling at the College of Mount St. Vincent and serves as an adjunct instructor at Fordham University. Betty's also an associate professor emerita of psychology at Concordia College in New York, and her counseling practice includes early childhood, adolescents, early, middle, and late adulthood, and couples. We are so grateful for your expertise and grateful for your time that you've shared with us today. Betty, welcome.
Thank you. Everybody can hear me, I think, right? And I have my chat open here, so hopefully we won't have, hopefully I'll be able to see, what it is that you're chatting. And, obviously, Karen, if you would like to, say, hold on a second, this seems to be important as far as what you are discussing. So, I have a few slides that I want to share with you on the impact of COVID on children. And, we are really just gathering the data. Okay, it takes time in terms of research to be able to gather the data of what the impact is. And so, I think a safe thing to say is that the global impact of the pandemic is likely to be felt for years. Okay, and I don't think we are going, I think it's going to be a defining point where we say, these are the children who grew up in the pandemic. So some of the things that children experienced during COVID is social restriction, not being able to go and do what children do naturally, which is play, social isolation, okay, where many children were left at home, even some of them for up to a year, with the only interaction being parental interaction or adult interaction. Fear of illness. We're seeing a lot of children in our practices now who are very afraid of getting sick, very afraid of germs. And, it makes sense when something takes up so much of your childhood, and we're always have been talking about illness and germs for the last several years, that might be something. Some children, we are noticing phobias, okay, that, the child is really not functioning well due to debilitating fear. Interruption of education. Okay, some children have spent time at home on the computer or not on the computer. Some children, their education has been, dramatically interrupted. And I'm a parent of 4 grown children. My last one just graduated from college. And, about March of 2020, April of 2020, my husband came home and said, people are having to work and teach their kids. And he said, it's a good thing this didn't happen to us, because we would have given up in the first couple of weeks. So for those of you who really did that, educated your children home, trying to work, those are kind of the winners of the pandemic, the ones who were actually able to do it. But many families were not able to do it due to resources, due to technology issues, due to lack of education or lack of mental health as far as the parents. So this put families under tremendous stress. Okay, the amount of stress that we're seeing research now on mothers, that a lot of mothers really bore the brunt of trying to educate their children as well as working from home. Many families lost their jobs. Okay, early in the pandemic, we realized that school was something where a lot of people had their food. So some families faced food insecurity. And, we did try to correct that, but it doesn't really take long to live with food insecurity before it can become a major psychological issue. And we've been through a lot, okay? Certain areas of professionals, nurses and teachers, and lots of people who interact with children have really been through a lot. Now, the one thing that we can point to is that children seem to have been spared damage from a physical perspective, meaning that they were not the target. There wasn't a severity of physical illness, but there has been a significant impact on mental health, overall behavior, okay, even so much that we call it we often refer to it as the COVID kids. And the nuclear family has really been impacted. And as I started to say in the beginning, the research is ongoing and it takes time to produce. So we are studying this phenomenon as it is happening, and we're studying it also as we're living it. And what researchers like to, point out is when we're studying something as we're living it ourselves, that's not the most objective lens to view research through. So when we, kind of zoom out and look at other illnesses like SARS or H1N1, the research shows in a large scale, something that we have a little perspective of, longitudinal studies, meaning we're studying something over time, that there was very, very serious, immediate and long-lasting mental health issues anytime we've had any type of public illness, public physical illness. And things that have come out of the H1N1, things like adjustment, things like anxiety, depression, PTSD. And what we do know from living this experience, just observational data, is that 3 groups of people, educators, parents, and students, have been living in tremendous stress. And when we look to children at their mental health, we look at how they're functioning, we often take a look at the adults that are surrounding the children. And what we know is that children take their emotional cues for emotional safety from the people that are surrounding them. And it's very hard for children to move past an adult. Okay, sometimes we refer to that as the parentified child, the person who the child who knows that their adult doesn't have it all together and that they're assuming some of the parental roles. So in this time period of COVID, a lot of the adults who have surrounded children have not been functioning in a manner that communicated to children that they were emotionally safe, and that the adults have been indeed in a compromised state. So I would really say, hats off to parents and teachers. Not really sure how those groups of people did it. So when we take a snapshot, like how are we doing? There's a big study that comes out of England. And, as I said, we're gathering data and everybody's kind of rushing to print these studies. But so 2020 versus 2017. So 1 in 6 children aged 5 to 16 were identified as probable mental health, as having a probable mental health condition, compared to 2017, where it was 1 in 9 were identified as having a probable mental health condition. And this was found in the mental health of children and people. So, that's a significant increase, much more pronounced mental health challenges as far as children in the age of 5 to 16. And then a little subgroup of this study said that the children that were more seriously impacted were children aging 5 to 10. So JAMA Pediatrics did a meta-analysis, okay, and that I'm trying to just move the slide here. I'll just read from my notes. JAMA Pediatric Journal reports on dozens of global studies, and this is a meta-analysis. And what a meta-analysis is that we take all sorts of studies, individual studies, and we pull them together and we gather the data from that. So they looked at 29 studies globally, 80,879 youth. And what they found from that is 1 in 4 youth showing signs of depression, and 1 in 5 youth clinically showing significant signs of anxiety. And then in addition to this, in their study, what they looked at is children who were sent home for protection, that the impact of quarantine, the impact of being isolated, and the impact of being home really kind of hurt their mental health. So just imagine the complexity of this psychologically. We are sending you home to be safe. We are putting you in quarantine to be safe, but that is also impacting you. And so for children in quarantine, the stress levels 4 times as high for children in quarantine. And that, that's from an article called The Psychological Burden of Quarantine. So it is really like we couldn't win, okay? There really is not, there wasn't an easy way. We send them home to protect them from quarantine, and then they're experiencing tremendous stress levels. The grownups who are around them are not really in any shape to help them and to help them manage. And that can be problematic. So I see somebody here who says, Karen, I guess, as a parent of 2 kids ages 5 to 10, that's something that is being observed. And, if you speak with kindergarten and first grade teachers, they also will acknowledge that, a lot has been lost. Now, it's not hopeless. It's not like we're never going to catch up, but it is something that we need to be aware of when we're working with children. So economics was another issue that tended to be really hard. Most parents have experienced severe economic hardship, and many families were thrust into poverty. And we do know that living in poverty has a significant developmental impact. So even when we study something as simple as an economic downturn where, we're heading towards recession or inflation is high, we know that anytime we have studied that phenomenon, what we see is behavior challenges, difficulties in self-esteem or self-efficacy, and school attendance. So, when we look at this pandemic to realize all of the aspects that have all of the aspects of the people who have been impacted. And it's important to note that where you started out pre-pandemic has a lot to do with where you are post-pandemic. Truthfully, some families were hardly inconvenienced by the pandemic, and then others who have less resources, who were more vulnerable to start with as far as substance use, as far as mental health, as far as economics or finances, those families tend to be in worse position post-pandemic. So, like everything, the more resources you have to insulate you from something like this, the most likely you might be doing better at the end. So particularly of particular concern, children with low income, children who have low support, poor educational opportunities, much more vulnerable to a lasting impact. So, I've spoken with several teachers from New York City public schools, and in the pandemic, it was very hard for them to keep up with who should be in school, who has a computer to log into school. And when we refer to this as adverse childhood experiences, that adverse childhood experiences tend to have a cumulative impact on the child. So as we move forward, and as we make decisions in education and mental health of children, we really need to be mindful of policies and programs that are going to bridge this gap. Okay, so what are we going to do, for all children, but what also are we going to do for children who were more vulnerable at the start? Okay. So other concerns, we have a whole bunch of other concerns regarding COVID and ways that children were impacted. And one of them is brain development. So brains develop based on stimulation, okay, and based on experience. And the brain wires itself through repeated experience. Okay, so you do something repeatedly, you wire yourself, your brain wires, and that's called blooming. Okay, so then you have all of these neurons that are blooming and connecting due to the stimulation that they are experiencing. And then there are other types of neurons that are pruning, okay, and those neuronal connections are actually going away. And the idea is that what the desired outcome is that the brain wires stimulates other neuronal pathways to open up, and then the ones that are not being used are going by the wayside. But the concern here, as far as brain development is that impoverished environments where there was little stimulation actually causes the brain to shrink and causes fewer connections to be made. So how do we get back in and open up this brain development and this pruning? And so we're from a environmental, perhaps psychological issue, we're actually seeing physiological responses. So this idea of the nature nurture, whether we are the sum of our biology or whether we are nurtured by our environment, what we know in psychology is that it is not an either or, that your environment impacts your biology and your biology impacts your environment. So we want to be mindful of that an impoverished environment can potentially have long-lasting consequences. So some The major concerns when we're looking at the youngest of the children in early childhood, if we were to think about early childhood from a developmental perspective, what we talk about is that childhood is the age of exploration. Okay, we want them to explore, we want them to play, we want them to grow physically, emotionally, socially. We want them to break away from their parents and establish their independence. And none of that was really possible in a COVID environment of quarantine. Some kindergarten children spent their whole early childhood far away from other children. So their physical development was stunted, their social development was stunted, their emotional development was stunted. Many children had delayed health visits, even as grown-ups. You might be experiencing this situation where it's really hard to get doctor's appointments and people put off a lot of doctor's visits. And, sadly, we're seeing the benefits of that. I heard a doctor speaking the other day who said, lots of put off appointments resulted in cancer being far more advanced. But for young children, delayed doctor's appointments can result in, physical things that could have been corrected or early intervention. So there's a lot of missed opportunities as with this health visits and screenings. So basically 2 years have gone by where we could have had early intervention and we could have been reworking some of the problem areas. So, our most common challenges are speech and language delay that would go undetected. And, as soon as we can, early intervention is really the key to kind of opening back up these neuronal pathways, rewiring the brain, and helping so children move forward. And a lot of children, simply put, do not have early intervention services because their health visits were delayed or their health visits were on Zoom. And they're first being detected 2 years later. And that is putting the child in a situation of, very serious learning challenges and a major loss where if it was something that was addressed as the child was moving forward and as the child was growing, they might be in another place. Minimal cognitive and social stimulation. Okay, I think we've covered this already in the talk, but that, a home environment with stressed out parents and computer and screen time and, not a lot of going out and going to the playground or going to the zoo or really going anywhere didn't help anybody. So when we speak with kindergarten teachers and early childhood, one of the areas that often gets, these are COVID kids. I hear preschool teachers and kindergarten teachers often say that. And one of the things that they have missed out on completely is this idea of sharing, okay? And consequently empathy for others and my need versus individual need, okay? That, they haven't really had to do much of collaborative learning where, this is the group of kids that have had arts and crafts put on their desk in a little baggie, and then they put things together, as opposed to coming up and sharing the crayons and having a discussion and, running out of that last thing that you wanted for your project and learning how to deal with that, or learning that somebody else maybe really wanted a supply that you had. None of that was happening in their COVID education. Many children have a lot of separation anxiety from their family, that they have not had to be away. And, they've been home with their parents. They haven't had the independence of going to school. They're not used to people. So sometimes we're seeing stranger anxiety, where this is a big concept, 5, 6 years old to be coming into your first experience with strangers. So keep in mind when we're looking at young children in connection to this COVID experience, how long COVID has persisted relative to a young child's lifespan. So when we think about the brain and when we think about physical development and all of that, a 5-year-old has been dealing with COVID for 3 years of their life, more than half their life. Same thing like a 4-year-old, they've been now three years of COVID. So asking them to socialize, asking them to play, asking them to go out to preschool, this is, a very different experience for them than kids who were pre-COVID. So if anybody has any questions, don't hesitate to put it in the chat. I see the chat here, or if you would like to have a little more discussion on one of the talking points, please don't hesitate to put it into the chat. So another group that has really had a tremendous hit as far as COVID and the COVID experience is this idea of growing up as an adolescent or a young adult. And so many things were canceled. And I can only imagine what we're going to discover as far as the canceled things and what that impact was, the cultural milestones that adolescents or young adults would experience and just where they did not experience. So adolescence, unlike childhood, this is a time really that is marked by rapid physical growth and sexual maturation, and additionally, extensive brain development. But what's unique about adolescence is their amygdala in their brain is what is really developing. So the passion or the feeling center of the brain develops much earlier than the judgment. So this idea that they have a lot of passion and they have a lot of feelings, and they don't have the prefrontal cortex to rein it in as far as the judgment. So even under the best of circumstances, when we look at adolescents up until the age of 22, there is a very natural imbalance. And perhaps that's to make us fall in love and make us reproduce. Who knows, like from a biological standpoint or animalistic standpoint, it had to serve us. But when we expect adolescents to fit into civilized society, sometimes when we interact with adolescents, we're like, wow, you don't have that quite right. So from a social perspective, adolescents are dominated by egocentrism. They are first. There is an extreme focus on themselves, and that's all normal. And it has to do with their brain. But so the other time in development where we see this egocentrism is in early childhood, where understanding a different perspective can be very, very difficult for a 2-year-old. And not much is different in adolescence. And sometimes we refer to the twos as the first adolescence, and then we get into adolescence in all its glory. So 2 processes of egocentrism. One is this personal fable, and this is the idea that adolescents hold based on their cognitive development, that they're unique and that they haven't felt what other people have felt. Okay, that this is just overpoweringly unique to them, and that the parents don't know. The rules of life don't apply to them. The pandemic doesn't apply to them. So sometimes in light of a personal fable, we might have somebody, this is why adolescents drive and drink and drive in the pandemic, why adolescents and young adult college students weren't careful as far as the virus and making sure that they didn't get it or they didn't bring it to somebody else. I used to say to my college students who were going out and hanging out and doing whatever and coming down with COVID every couple of weeks, I would say, you're going to get COVID and you're going to be fine. I'm going to die. So please think about that before you go to the bar and hang out without your mask. Like, do you want to kill your psychology professor? And hope they did not. I did not get COVID from them. But, in colleges, it was running rampant, this pandemic. And a lot of it has to do with this cognitive process that goes on. So the other process here is called the imaginary audience. And this is an adolescent's tendency to believe that everyone is as interested in them as they are. So how they look, what clothes they wear, this constant social comparison. And for many adolescents at certain stages, they behave like they are on stage. So there's this tremendous period of evaluation, okay? And the brain is constantly changing and, much more likely to change than, say, the adolescent, than to say the tween-age brain. So some adolescents actually enjoyed staying home, okay, and avoiding the social drama of high school. And some actually enjoyed the mask. So for adolescents who tended to have social anxiety, the pandemic might have been a relief. It made them feel safe. It could cover up some skin problems, give them a little bit of an opportunity to hide, kind of like everybody's dream as far as college is concerned. There was limited social hierarchy, meaning they did not have to deal with bullies, limited peer pressure, social anxiety. They didn't have to go out of the house. And I heard from many parents, like, this is way better than what we were dealing with in high school. So, for some kids, some adolescents, what was noted is that they got a break. Like, they didn't have to go through the worst 2 years of high school in high school. They got to stay home, or they got to cover up. So somebody says, my niece is in 9th grade, and she says she enjoys wearing a mask in class because she doesn't have to worry about looking interested. She can just relax and listen. Yeah, so that's another really important issue. Like, it is hard to determine who's paying attention when they're completely covered up all the time. So on some level, and once again, research will sort this out for us, on some level, it might not have been horrible to have high school interrupted, depending on how you experienced high school. But remember, there's a developmental point of adolescence and a developmental point of high school. And many adolescents experienced limited social interaction. The number one thing that studies tell us about adolescents in COVID and young adults in college is that they missed their friends. They had limited ability to use that amygdala and challenge the status quo, okay? One thing that we did see was tremendous outpouring of adolescents and young adults in the Black Lives Matter. It's like everybody came out to challenge that social movement. The technical age range for adolescents. So adolescence, hard to know when it begins because it's largely a biological process in the beginning. So we would say, some young girls are starting as early as 9 or 10 and extends 18 to 21. So, and a lot of how adolescence is depends on the sexual maturation of the body, the physical maturation of the body. So an early maturing individual might have a lot of adolescence wrapped up by, say, 18 years of age, but we know that the prefrontal cortex is not firmly developed almost until mid-20s. So it's brain development, sexual maturation, it's a lot of things that qualify. So college students, we refer to them as early adulthood, but there's a lot of overlap developmentally from college students, young adults, into adolescence. And some boys arrive at college not really fully through adolescence in their first year of college. So limited speaking up for cause, limited dating, limited ability to practice, even though sometimes high school relationships can be silly and you wonder like what's really going on, but they are practicing. They are kind of ruling out things that they don't like and ruling in things that they do like. So for some people, I'm going to move that up there. 1/2 of high school or college years were spent at home, and particularly in higher ed. I mean, I spend my days in higher ed. but we're still not completely recovered. And part of that, you can understand, the faculty are usually significantly older than college students. It takes a long time to accomplish the academic goals in order to be a faculty member. So you're dealing with aging faculty well into their 50s and 60s and 70s, and a virus out there that can take them out. So you can understand their hesitancy to be back in the classroom with a group of people who are not taking the mask mandates very seriously, because, like I pointed out, like this could really change somebody's life. They could get very, very sick as a result of it. So this is a very significant thing. 1/2 of high school or college years at home. And how will that impact us as far as all of these things that we imagine they miss out on in light of the developmental stage that they're at. Okay, so this, perfect. Social media, screens, texting, 2019 to 2021 screen time grew by 17%. So down here, this is the common sense census, media use by tweens and teens, 2021, if you'd like to look that up. So 4 hours and 45 minutes to 5 hours and 33 minutes among tweens. So that's the age group before teenage years. So from say 8 to 12. And then teenagers, 722 to 839. And there's some studies that say that this does not have to do with homework necessarily, that this has to do with just movies and social media and talking to each other. Yes, per day, absolutely per day. And another concern that we have here is this aging down of social media, that one of the fastest growing groups is the 8 to 12-year-olds who are on all sorts of social media, all sorts of websites. Lack of exercise. Okay, when you are sitting with your phone, you are not moving around, you are not exercising. Something else that I've been aware of leading groups of particularly younger adults, younger adolescents, is these canned answers, this TikTok community where there's all sorts of language that that we talk about, whether it's just these kind of buzzwords that everybody's saying, and they're not even a lot of meaning attached to it, but it's just a way of communicating that they've heard over and over again. And there's a million studies studies on sleep interference, and phones in rooms are terrible, terrible ideas for anyone. Yeah, unalived, right? Unalived. Yes, I've certainly heard that. They don't say died, they say unalived. And a lot of it, you can just see it coming right out of the TikTok culture, social media, and I mean, and the emotion that gets assigned to a text message, even though it's just words, these are all really problematic. So when we think that between this time period, we've had such tremendous growth of social media, and we know the problems, adolescents, young adults, I mean, the average adolescent needs 9 hours and 20 minutes of sleep a night, and most of them are not even getting 7. So phones in the room, even if they are shut off, tend to interrupt sleep. So that's something that we need to, kind of get a handle on all of this. Like, what are we going to do in regards to social media? So some talk about, 17%, that's just important. Screen time grew by 17%. And, other reasons that this is problematic. What are they watching? Okay. 1/3 of adolescents in one study reported that they can't live without TikTok. That they can't live without YouTube. And another exposure that is critical that we're going to have to spend some time on doing is this unrealistic relationships, that this idea that we film or refilm every social interaction is really contributing to social anxiety, that you didn't say the right thing. Well, in live conversation with people, we don't always say the right thing. But if you are constantly watching filmed videos of people, they get a retake. So this refilming of social interaction has set up very unrealistic expectations for how we really interact with each other. And yeah, and okay, and then also, this wiring of the brain, okay, that, everything that we're spending hours and hours doing is wiring our brain. Now, it is important to keep in mind that there were some positives, okay? The pandemic was not only negative, even though I just spent, how long talking about all the negatives. Some people did not experience as much pain in high school as they would have without the pandemic. Another real positive aspect of the pandemic is families were able to slow down, okay, and that they weren't running to a million different things. And many people have come out of the pandemic and said, we don't ever want to go at that speed again, what we were doing pre-pandemic. So some families have really kind of looked and said, perhaps this was better. And upon re-entry, activities became choices as opposed to signing up for everything. And I remember in the first weeks of heading out, where when we were finally really allowed to go safely to other people's houses, I thought, how am I ever going to make it through dessert? Like, this is so much conversation that I have to have here, this 2.5 hours that I'm at somebody else's house. And families did spend more time together. Now, some families were under a tremendous amount of stress, but some families actually did have really good experiences. So something in terms of re-entry, what we want to be mindful of is this extent that it's almost half of young children's lives that adolescents have spent a lot of time, college students have spent a lot of time hearing that it's really dangerous out there, okay, that there's germs and that we need to be masked and hand washing and this fear for our safety. But now it's over. Now we're going out. Now we're back out. And we don't tend to adjust that rapidly. And a lot of people report social fatigue after, being inside and re-entering. And we do have permission to stay away. Okay, we do have permission to take a break. No one has to be as busy as they were in their pre-pandemic life. And, I used to have this saying before everything got canceled, including my daughter's wedding. I used to say, I love canceled things because my life was way too busy. And just this intentional choice of what I would like to do afterwards. And, another thing that we have encouraged families to do is allow children to express their feelings about activities. What did you think about that? Do you want to go and do that? And support and validate the fact that some people are still really impacted by the fact that they might be getting sick. So I want to leave a little more time for questions. So some of the warning signs, and when do we need to get professional help? Danger, distress, dysfunction, deviance, these are all words. Is the person in danger? We always go for help. How much distress is happening? What's the level of dysfunction? How far away from the norm is it? What are their emotions like? Are they able to regulate their emotions? Are we seeing excessive anxiety, obsessive compulsive routines? Are we seeing excessive sadness? Okay, depression, how is that manifesting itself? And then, of course, any talk of suicide would always be time to bring in a professional. And most professionals in the counseling profession, we have been flooded as far as counseling appointments in seemingly, my practice really, really flooded with adolescent girls, like middle school girls seem to, at least in my area where I practice, seem to have a lot of trouble handling this shutdown and not being able to develop socially. So these are all areas where I would really encourage you to don't hesitate to contact the professionals. So I'd like to open it up for questions or comments or anything that anybody would like.
Yeah, now's a great time to go ahead and type your questions there in the chat. One of the things that I keep thinking of, this is our audience is primarily people, and I'm wondering what are some ways that we as churches can be investing and supporting children and families. I know that's sort of like a big general question, but of course that's always where my brain is going is, for example, one of the things that we've seen is a lot of our preschoolers and toddlers we don't see them at church anymore because they were the last to get the vaccine. And even those that were in daycare, they had working parents, they had parents that were doctors and all kinds of things. So they were going to daycare or preschool or whatever, but the additional exposure of a whole nother group of people at church was too risky. And so we don't have we don't see them anymore. They're children. There's a child born in our church that I didn't meet till she was over a year old.
Wow.
And I was able to meet her parents at a park and say hi after a year though. And so
well, and on one level, I certainly understand that, you're taking an unvaccinated child out and what are the risks to the child and to the people they're interacting with. But on the flip side of that, that is impacting the child, as we're just talking about, in terms of their social and emotional development. So I like what you just said. And I think we're going to have to be very mindful of what we are putting in place in light of where we are, and we're going to have to keep up with the research and this idea that just because it worked pre-pandemic, maybe it isn't going to work post-pandemic. So how can we meet with the youngest and the oldest tend to be the vulnerable populations. I mean, we might even be dealing with older people who are not coming to church anymore either. So how can the church be present in ways that aren't typical I'm going to church? So somebody else says here, I was intrigued by your comment that we let children decide what they want to do. What they want to do and feel comfortable with. I wonder if that's why fewer children and families are at church. Parents are maybe letting children make the choice not to attend at an earlier age than they used to. So I'm certainly not a subscriber to, early childhood kids running the family, I mean, that's not what I'm, and I'm not saying that that's what you're inferring, but I think like the world is very scary when children get to call all the shots because they don't have the ability to do it. But I mean, what we hope is that church is a family priority. So how can the church meet the family where they are? And it is my hope that the toddler or the preschooler isn't deciding, but you could see where, we're going 5 days a week to preschool or whatever, we're exposing ourselves to those germs, and then we don't want to take them into another environment of Sunday school or church. So how are we going to address that? How are we going to make it safe? Or is there something that we could be doing that would be drawing them back to church? But let's hope it isn't that the children get to decide whether they go to church or not, because church is a really important part of development. Stephanie, wondering that, Catherine. Yeah, I mean, this would be, I think if this is something that, people are wondering about, you're probably onto something, and it might really just be good asking. Like, as I mentioned, I'm a mom of 4, and I do remember we went to church every Sunday as a family, but I do remember some Sundays just feeling like I got them out the door 5 days a week. Now I got one more day. And and we had a big church family and a very active community. So we always went, but that's another investigation. Like, what is it? What are families really experiencing trying to get kids out the door another day of the week? Okay, so who else? Thinking more of our elementary school kids. Yeah, same question. What is it like? And then how can, if it is really parents letting kids decide, how can we help the parents to understand that their spiritual development is critical for their overall development?
Shannon was asking how is church good benefit kids developmentally?
Yeah, so
Are
church,
there ways you can?
yeah, so one thing I think about church is it's not competitive. You are valued, okay? They have a whole group of people who are helping them to grow up, helping them, to learn about being good and putting goodness into the world. And hopefully that community, sticks by them. So that's really where I think the major, besides the religious aspect of it, but from a developmentalist standpoint, this idea that everybody's rooting for you at your church and your family has support. I mean, we know that in times of trouble and times of trauma, people who have community do better, okay, recover. And that I think what my children learned from church is we are there for other families and other families are there for us, and this community functions to help everybody. And then I think the routine of church is very good. I think the Bible stories, I mean, part of my dissertation is on religion, and I studied college students and the impact of religious colleges on how well you do in college. And hands down, what I found in my research is church is good for people, or religious faith is good for people. It doesn't have to be Christian church, but religious faith develops social order, and it is a huge stress reliever. Okay, even as a little tiny kid, to understand that you can pray. Prayer in itself, whether you believe God is answering you or listening to you or not, is a stress reliever. So, that's just a real simple reason why church is good for people developmentally. All right, what else? What other questions?
Sorry, we missed one at the beginning.
Okay.
Kate had asked any advice for toddlers who have never been with other adults outside their homes.
Yeah.
It's speaking specifically of things like childcare in a worship setting. Kate noted separation anxiety is rougher than it used to be, and the approach where it was sort of like rip off the Band-Aid, let the parent leave, and they'll calm down and have fun after you leave, is not working.
No, because it's not even simple separation anxiety anymore. It's gone on for almost half their life. So it is the norm of their life. And I think it has to be gradual. And I'm not sure, I used to, I think I used to probably advise that, like, rip the Band-Aid off and let them get used to it. And, perhaps the ones who are not getting used to it have already started to, really move into, diagnosable social anxiety. So how do we do that? With exposure, we help them a little bit at a time. Perhaps they go to things that are shorter. Perhaps there's, more mom and me time or caregiver time. I think we're going to have to be creative in how we help this stranger anxiety. I mean, some kids didn't see their grandparents for a year and a half, so how do we help this, and then recognize that it's not on a developmental time period that we've ever experienced before.
One of the things that we're doing in our church is we've always said that while we do have a nursery or childcare available for families that want it, or for children that want it, that it's not a requirement that babies or toddlers or preschoolers leave the sanctuary, that they are always welcome to stay. And we're trying to be as clear about that as we can, because some of those younger children, that might have preferred a childcare setting, don't prefer a childcare setting anymore. And so they want to stay with their parents. They want to stay with their grandparents. And so we've said we're trying to normalize that within our congregation, and to welcome that, and to say, it's okay. Guess what? Children can make a little bit of noise. You make a little bit of noise too.
Right.
The hearing aids beeping, hearing aids go off and make buzzing noise and interfere with our sound system. Sometimes your cell phone goes off and you don't know how to turn it off. They might leave goldfish crumbs. It's just goldfish crumbs,
Right.
You have to get up to leave to go to the restroom. So do they. That we set some boundaries for what's acceptable and what's not acceptable, but we also have much wider boundaries for what's acceptable for a toddler.
Well, I also think, like churches, if we're not going to be open to children and their developmental needs, we're not going to have a church. So,
right.
Like that really is critical as far as, and, perhaps educating some of the adults who maybe aren't in the throes of child rearing, that this is different. This is unprecedented. We have never, perhaps in 1918, they experienced this with the influenza breakout, but we've never experienced this. So all of the developmental norms that we have for children are shifted as a result of that. Some of them have never been with another caregiver, or some of them have been in families that are really compromised as far as support, emotional support. All right. Anybody else have other questions?
We are getting close to time. We want to be respectful of your time, Betty.
Okay.
If there's a burning question, you guys can ask it, but I always love to ask our presenters to close and say, if there are any words of encouragement that you might give to our audience, be they parents, pastors, church educators. I'm going to be sending this out to everyone in my church and saying, hey, I think this is required listening. For us all to be thinking, people who care for children. What encouragement can you give to people who love kids?
We just don't give up on them, and we understand that if there is a difference of separation anxiety, that now is not really the time to say like, oh, go just do it. That we might have to be a little more gentle in our approach. We might need to be really looking at policy. And I mean, this is very much the church's job, looking at policy and programming that shrinks the gap between the haves and the have-nots, because the truth is the have-nots got hit really, really hard by this. So that's something that we want to be mindful of. And perhaps, some who were in more vulnerable positions pre-pandemic, they haven't even made their way back to church. So how can we check on those families and make sure that, they're emerging out of the pandemic like the rest of us? And I think, on one hand, it's sad that we have to be doing this. On the other hand, this is the mission of the church, that we take care of each other. So on one hand, it might be what brings us all back to church, is that we're looking out for each other, and specifically children.
Wow, thank you so much. We really appreciate your time and expertise, and we wish you all days that are full of peace and purpose. Goodbye, everyone.
Thank you. Take care.